Let's go back in time. It's November 22nd, 1963, a beautiful, bright Friday morning in Dallas, Texas. There's this incredible sense of optimism in the air. Crowds are lining the streets, kids are out of school, and they're all just trying to get a glimpse of the President of the United States.
And John F. Kennedy, he is just soaking it all in. He's in an open-top convertible, smiling, waving back at everyone. His wife Jackie is right there beside him in that now famous pink suit. Honestly, the whole thing looks like a movie, you know? A perfect picture of American confidence.
And then, at 12:30 p.m., in a matter of seconds, everything changes forever. 3 shots ring out across Dealey Plaza.
So, to really understand what happened, you have to ask, why was President Kennedy even in Texas? Well, it was a really critical political trip. The Democratic Party was pretty fractured there, and with the 1964 election on the horizon, he was trying to smooth things over and build some unity.
And right here, we hit our first really big question mark. The entire route for the motorcade was public knowledge. It was printed in the local papers days beforehand. And that route took the president right past a 7-story warehouse called the Texas School Book Depository.
And working inside that very building, up on the 6th floor, was a 24-year-old employee, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay, and this is where the simple story just falls apart, because Lee Harvey Oswald was not just some random angry guy. His personal history reads like something straight out of a Cold War spy thriller.
Get this, he was a former U.S. Marine, someone with radar training. And in 1959, at the absolute peak of the Cold War, he just walks into the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and tries to renounce his American citizenship to defect to the Soviet Union.
He actually lived in Minsk for 2.5 years. But then, and this part has never really been explained, the U.S. government just kind of let him come home. They even loaned him the money for the plane tickets for himself and his new Russian wife, Marina.
And he doesn't just quietly settle down. Nope. Just a few months before the assassination, he's already on the FBI's radar for handing out pro-Cuba pamphlets in New Orleans. Look, these aren't just trivia points. They paint a picture of a man who is way more complicated and connected than the official story lets on.
Right. So in the aftermath of the assassination, the Warren Commission is put together to investigate everything. And after almost a year of work, they released this massive 888-page report that was meant to be the final, definitive word on the matter.
And the conclusion was simple, and it was clear. The commission found that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting all by himself, fired 3 shots from that 6th-floor window with a cheap, mail-order rifle. 1 shooter, 1 gun, case closed.
But case closed was the last thing it was, because for the man accused of the crime, the clock was already ticking down. 48. That's the number of hours Oswald had left to live after President Kennedy died. I mean, just stop and think about the sheer insanity of this. The man accused of assassinating the president is murdered by a local nightclub owner in the basement of the Dallas police station on live television for millions to see. He never got to testify. No one ever cross-examined him. He was just erased.
And with Oswald's death, this huge information vacuum was created, a void that was almost immediately filled with doubt. Doubt that was fueled by some pretty major inconsistencies in that official story.
Exactly. I mean, critics look at the so-called magic bullet theory, where 1 bullet supposedly caused 7 different wounds in 2 men, and they say it's physically impossible. Years later, a congressional investigation found acoustic evidence that strongly suggested a 4th shot. And maybe most compelling, tons of eyewitnesses that day didn't run away from the book depository, they ran towards a grassy hill in front of the motorcade.
And what about Oswald himself? He never confessed. For the entire 48 hours he was in custody, he denied everything, and his last public words have haunted this case for decades. I'm just a patsy. A patsy, someone who's been set up to take the fall.
Now, to be fair and perfectly clear, the evidence against Oswald is very real. The rifle they found was matched to him. They found his palm print on the weapon. He bought it through the mail. Witnesses put him in that building at that time, and he murdered a police officer, J.D. Tippit, while trying to escape.
So the point here isn't really if Oswald was involved. The evidence for that is pretty strong. The real question, the one that has just refused to go away for 60 years, is, was he the only one?
And that very question is why this assassination is so much more than just a historical event. 60 years on, it still has this incredible hold on the public imagination, and it's really worth asking, why?
Well, look at this. What's so amazing is how consistent this has been over the years. For decades, poll after poll has shown that a huge majority of Americans, sometimes as many as 80%, simply do not believe the official story. They're convinced there was a conspiracy. You know, I think there's just a deep human need to make sense of something so catastrophic. The idea that a young, vibrant president, the symbol of an entire generation, could be wiped out by one lone, insignificant man, it just doesn't compute. The sheer scale of the tragedy feels like it needs an explanation that's just as big.
That's true, but we also have to remember that sometimes history really does just turn on small, random, and awful acts.
And you know what? This story is actually still unfolding. For decades, thousands and thousands of government documents on the assassination were kept secret, classified. But just in the last several years, batches of these files have finally started being released to the public.
And researchers are digging through them right now, but so far there's no smoking gun. What they are finding is evidence of more government contact with Oswald than anyone admitted to, which just raises more questions. So instead of giving us answers, the files have, in a weird way, only made the mystery deeper.
Which leaves us right here, with this central dilemma. The case is sort of forever suspended between the official history and this enduring mystery. And it forces us to ask not just what happened that day in Dallas, but a much bigger question about truth and power and secrecy. In a story this important, who really gets to write the final